Who is the most underrated actor of all time?
It's Dolph Lundgren.
Correct. Why?
Well, because of his spiky hair, and
Yep.
his ice-cold demeanor, and his big muscles.
Absolutely.
I must break you. The guilty will be punished.
My name is Sergeant Andrew Scott.
Come on, guys, don't do this. If I don't get breakfast, I get real grumpy. I don't think you like me grumpy. And you go in pieces, asshole.
Let's kick some ass.
Hello and welcome back to I Must Break This Podcast, the fan podcast celebrating the cinematic career of action legend Dolph Lundgren. I'm your host, Sean, and today we're chatting two films, both released in the last year. One, a big budget Christmas release, and the other, a small independent Thanksgiving release. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, and Showdown at the Grand. Seeing as how both films were released at the tail end of 2023, and both films have Dolph taking on supporting roles where he's wearing crazy wigs in each, I thought we'd knock them both out here in this one episode. Lending me the help in discussing both films are show regulars and my good friends Chris Prentice and David Rosen. So, first up in this conversation will be our coverage of Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. In this sequel to the 2018 smash hit, Jason Momoa returns to the role as the underwater DC Comics superhero. This time, Aquaman must team up with his half-brother Orm to protect the throne of Atlantis after his nemesis Black Manta plans a personal attack of revenge. Lundgren also returns as King Nereus, a proud Atlantean king who assists Aquaman in retaining his throne.
I'm gonna kill Aquaman, murder his family, and burn his kingdom to ash. I will avenge my father, even if I have to make a deal with the devil. I'm coming for you.
We'll pick a fight.
Fine. Flex your muscles.
He must be stopped.
If you lead, the Seven Kingdoms will follow.
Sometimes not giving up is the most heroic thing you can do.
Returning to the show to discuss this one is David Rosen from the Piecing It Together podcast. Now, this conversation was actually on his podcast, and I figured I'd include it here as well. So here is our coverage of Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Enjoy.
All right, we've got Sean Malloy back with us. We are going to talk about Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, a movie that I have been waiting for a long time as one of the people out there who appreciates the ridiculousness of what James Wan brought to this series. But Sean, first of all, it's early morning that we're recording this. Do you have yourself a nice little cockroach sandwich to enjoy to wake up today?
I just have a caffeinated beverage, unfortunately, but yeah, I think that should do the job. But yeah, cockroach sandwich, man, wasn't that hilarious? You know, so
that has to have been done like 1,000 times before. But I was just like, Patrick Wilson sells it, so you know, it's all good. Were you a big fan of the first Aquaman? I mean, obviously your boy Dolph Lundgren was in it, so there's, you know, that connection and everything. But were you on the wavelength of the ridiculousness that this, you know, this particular kind of superhero movie was trying to bring?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you go back 2018, Christmas of 2018, I was so stoked and psyched for the first Aquaman, and I think there are a number of reasons. First of all, I mean, the character of Aquaman, I mean, if you go back, I mean, I remember reading comics back in the comic collecting heyday when I was a little kid, back in the early 90s. And Aquaman was always kind of that dopey, kind of dorky superhero that always kind of got always kind of got laughed at. I mean, if you look at clips on Family Guy and on Big Bang Theory,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? He's not the flashiest superhero. So what was really cool about the first movie that came out in 2018 was how it really made the character seem cool. You know what I mean? I mean, casting Jason Momoa really kind of added that rock and roll element to him. The fact that Dolph Lundgren was going to be playing King Nereus in the first one, even though it was a small supporting role, it was coming off the heels of Creed 2. That was pretty exciting. And at the time, it was really kind of cool because it's not like we were in a low abundance of superhero movies in 2018 by any means.
Sure.
Okay, but what was cool about the first one is that it seemed to add something new. It seemed to add something new and fresh to the overcrowded superhero genre. And so, yeah, when it came out, I was stoked. I loved the first one. Okay. Even though it's CGI City, you know what I mean? I don't think a single set was built for any of these movies. It was all done in front of a green screen. But I was really stoked for the first one, and it delivered. With the second one, I mean, I think there's a lot of factors that kind of come into play for why reception to the new one has been a little lukewarm. I think the fact that they waited 5 years to release the new one, I think was a little bit too long of a gap. But then again, we had a pesky pandemic and writer's strike and everything like that kind of delayed the release of this one. But it certainly didn't help. But yeah, long roundabout answer. Loved the first one. And so I was pretty welcoming to a sequel. I mean, it made sense.
Well, awesome. I'm glad that you are coming to this from the same kind of headspace that I was, because I just had so much fun with the first one. It's so ridiculous, but like it's fun. It's like a lot of these superhero movies are either too goofy or they're too grimdark, and I felt like James Wan and Jason Momoa and Patrick Wilson, like I felt like these guys like got a specific tone, and that's what I loved so much about it. It's such a work of vision of like, this is what we want to do. And, it might be out there, it might be crazy, but it's a very specific thing. And like you said, there wasn't really anything else quite like it. And there still really isn't. I don't feel like anybody kind of has the balls to like go this crazy with their superhero movies. So I'm really happy that the second one kind of delivered. Not as good as the first, but it's like you said, it's had a bit of a messy path to release, and so at least we got something, and it still actually delivered on what those of us who liked the first one liked about it. But, with that said, let's start getting into some puzzle pieces, and we'll talk more about what works and what doesn't work along the way. What do you have for your first piece?
Well, and I hate bringing up a political commentator for one of these, but I mean, there's really no denying that what he stated a few years ago is true. But on Bill Maher's politically incorrect talk show that he does, he got a lot of heat because he threw shade at people who were expressing emotion, at intense emotion, I should say, at the passing of Stan Lee. And so and I'm not condoning what he said or anything like that, but I mean, he did bring up a really good point about these superhero movies. Is he said in so many terms, I'm gonna mince his words, but he basically said all these movies is about the good guys and the bad guys after a magic glowy thing. And if you really break down all of these movies, that's basically what's going on. Okay, if you looked at Black Adam, they're after a glowy, like what was it, a crown or something like that. Yeah, I mean, so, and all those like Marvel movies, they're always after something that is glowy. And then if you look at this one, it's following that same MO, that same thing. They're after this glowing green evil trident. Okay, and it's one of those things where, I mean, look, Bill Maher is 100% in the right by making that statement. And so anybody who is tired of these particular films, it's not Aquaman's fault. Okay, it's the fact that we've been getting too many superhero movies within the past couple years, that they're all following the same blueprint. They're all following the same thing. And I mean, look, if you look at that Guardians 3 movie, that one kind of came and went. It got some fanfare, but it seemed like some people liked it. But I mean, that one's been forgotten. Ant-Man, Quantumania, that one kind of came and went. You know what I mean? Then there was if you look at DC, there was the Shazam 2. You know what I mean? These movies are coming and going so quickly because there's not enough time for audiences to kind of take a breath and kind of take in what it was that we saw. And I mean that's with anything. When you put out content after content, especially if it's the same, then again, I've been saying this on my show and I've said it before, but you're going to saturate the market. You're going to tune fans off of the product that they love and that they want, or at least that they thought they wanted. And so then that's why we're in the current state that we are. I think we're kind of starting to see the bubble burst on these superhero movies, and we may not be seeing as many anymore, which kills me as a fan of this genre as that I once was. But even I have gotten just so burnt out of it.
Yeah. This year, and we're going to continue to see all these like think pieces on like what exactly is going wrong, because obviously these movies have been, the main box office draw of the last like 15 years, and this year it's just not really working out too well. And I think you're right. I think it's it's oversaturation is problem number one, and I guess we could call this puzzle piece all those superhero movies with the glowy things, because there's certainly a lot of them. You can make a big ass list of them. So, yeah, it's definitely something that's just been done to death. And yeah, we're seeing this year is going to be either course correction time, going into 2024, or they're going to drive it into the ground. And I do not know exactly what to expect, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see if these giant companies who have controlled the entire business for so long can kind of get it back, or if it's going to continue going downhill. Speaking of, glowy things to collect, I mean, I do have some superhero movies on my list, although I try to, not have too many. But I think the most obvious, as far as puzzle pieces go, like the most obvious thing to bring up is the Loki-Thor relationship. Loki being the villain who ends up becoming a hero, who is also still kind of bad and kind of goes back and forth. That's exactly the relationship that they're kind of bringing about with the sequel here with Orm, Ocean Master, Patrick Wilson's character, who is kind of the best part of these movies, I think. Like, he was so funny in the first one, just so over the top. And here he actually like gets all of the funniest moments. He's the most fun character. He gets the redemption arc, and kind of basing the movie around the villain, definitely brings to mind Loki. And Aquaman even calls him Loki at one point. Like, so it's like super on the nose that that's where they're going with it.
Well, that's a great segue into my next puzzle piece. But yeah, I mean, this particular film, I mean, and I'm not going to hate on it, you know what I mean? Because I mean, I feel like it's pretty much delivering exactly what the first one did, you know what I mean? But I think this one really did have an uphill battle throughout its maybe not so much through its production, but through its release. And I think a lot of that falls, I'm going to say it, sorry, but a lot of that falls on James Gunn's shoulders. Okay. James Gunn,
sure,
basically, not even in so many words, he announced that he was going to be retconning the entire DC extended universe, cinematic universe that we see. Okay. And he did this when we still had so many films that were that were awaiting release. So we still had Black Adam that was going to be coming out. We still had the Blue Beetle. We still had that Shazam, Fury of the Gods, and then we had this last Aquaman movie. And so it's just it's so sad. I mean, David, call me crazy, but don't most businesses at least let their employee finish out the day, or at least finish out the week before they get fired? You know what I mean? Like, I would think that's what most businesses do. But for him to make that announcement when he still had, 4 big, huge budget movies that were awaiting release, and then he makes that announcement, it makes all of these films, including this one, just seem completely inert and completely useless, you know?
Absolutely. It's such a bizarre choice, and I think we're going to be like studying this, like, as far as like looking back at the 2020s and movies, like how they could have messed this up so poorly.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you hear that they basically, that they shit canned the Batgirl movie. And it makes you wonder, like, how bad was it really? And I think I'd like to think, I wonder if Warner is kind of seeing that might have in the long run been a really bad move, because when you announce something like that, it doesn't really put you in the best, most favorable light with your fans. And also, I mean, the villain was going to be played by the guy who won the Academy Award for Best Actor. So they could have ridden on that. You know what I mean? To kind of give the film some. I'm not saying that the world is a sad place because we didn't have a Batgirl movie, but on the other hand, it's kind of like they could have dumped that on a streamer and they would have been fine.
Sure, absolutely. It's just a perfect like microcosm of everything wrong with the business right now, and especially the superhero business. But yeah, no, for sure. As long as we're talking superheroes, I'm going to get my other superhero puzzle piece out of the way here, which is more Marvel. Really, It's Black Panther and Iron Man. I mean, first of all, we've got so much Black Panther here with a secret country that's super, high tech, that doesn't want the rest of the world to know about them. And then ending on exactly the ending of the first Iron Man movie with Aquaman announcing himself to the world and announcing that I am Aquaman, which is, I'm not the first person to bring this up, but the most ridiculous thing to end the entire DCEU in the exact same place where the MCU started is just... I mean, it goes right back to you bringing up the James Gunn announcement. Like, what are they doing?
Exactly. I mean, look, the DCEU has had a lot of problems since its inception, and I think a lot of that is because Marvel kind of got to the gate first. And so everything that DC was doing was being looked at as copying Marvel, which I didn't really see that as fair, to be perfectly honest. I was always kind of rooting for DC to have the same success as Marvel. But yeah, you got to wonder when they're hitting the exact beat and nodding to the film that started the entire thing. That was one of my notes as well, so I could just take that right off my page as well. But yeah, you're going to end the movie with the exact same joke that they did in 2008's Iron Man. I mean, you said it perfectly. You wonder, like, what are they doing?
So crazy. Yeah. Oh man, they just have no clue what they're doing. That's really what it comes down to. But yeah, so I know you had Iron Man on your list, so I might as well go to another one too. I'm going with Geostorm because I think that this, definitely fits in as much with superhero movies as it does with disaster movies. And I actually really liked that they kind of went with the villain's whole thing here, Black Manta. That a side effect of his powers was going to be accelerating global warming. I think that was a kind of a clever, super villain, inadvertent, disaster movie kind of thing to happen. And so, there might be a better disaster movie that could be put in this place, but I thought of Geostorm when it comes to the acceleration of, all of the natural disasters and global warming and the whole message of what we're doing to the planet.
No, it's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, I didn't even think of that one. I mean, my big issue with, again, not just this movie, but all of these, not just, well, I guess you could say not just superhero movies, but movies in general nowadays. I mean, this kind of goes back to our Expendables 4 discussion that we had a few months back, but the lack of stakes in any of these movies. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really almost insulting nowadays, but we get no stakes. All of these movies are so afraid to kill off a character and provide any kind of real threat to the proceedings.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And now I'm not coming on here and I'm not saying that, oh yeah, characters need to die. Not necessarily. But I mean, if you really want to provide some real emotional gravity to your film, and you really want to pose like a real threat, and you really want to have that moment where your hero is terrified, okay, at what is going to happen, then yeah, you need some real stakes in this film. And I mean, and I will say this film is cribbing from a very popular Aquaman storyline that came out, I want to say in the early mid-70s or so, called Death of a Prince. Okay, and I'm not expecting you to be familiar with it or anything, but I mean, in that particular storyline, Black Manta kidnaps Arthur Curry's son. He was a little bit older at that time, so I think in that storyline, Arthur Jr. was about a toddler, but he was real little. But Black Manta kidnaps the son and puts him in like this in this imprisoned ball that is filled with air, and he basically he kills Aquaman's son. And so what that does is that sets Aquaman on the ultimate path of vengeance to avenge his kid and everything. I mean, that's a ballsy move. I mean, let's be honest, that's a ballsy move for not just a movie, but for a comic book to kill off a child. And I wasn't expecting, when I heard that they were going to be bringing back Black Manta, and I saw that he was going to have a son in this one, I knew that they were going to touch upon that particular storyline a little bit, but I also knew, okay, they're not going to kill his kid. Okay.
Right.
They're just not going to do that. However, what this film does is they do not kidnap his child until the final 30 minutes of the movie. I think this film would have had so many more stakes if they would have led with that and had Black Manta kidnap his child early in the movie. Then we could have really had, Aquaman really scared and trying to get his son back. What this film also does is there's the scene where Black Manta torches Arthur Curry's dad's home. Okay, and you think for a very brief minute that his dad, okay, Tamura Morrison's character, dies, but even he survives. They rescue him with some Atlantean technology, and it's like, man, they're not even going to kill off that character. Okay, they can't even kill off Mara. Wouldn't that have been something kind of cool too? Sorry, I'm kind of going off. I'm going off on this huge tangent, but I mean, Amber Heard had a ton of issues this year, and there were all these rumors that they were going to write her out of the movie and everything. What if they kidnapped her? What if they killed off that character? You know what I mean? But they don't want to take any chances in any of these movies and provide any kind of stakes. All characters are going to survive at the end, and I'm sorry, but when you're doing that, then your villain just is not intimidating in the least.
Right. No, absolutely. You're so right about that. And that is something we've been seeing in a lot of these superhero movies, especially once we start getting into the multiverses and all that stuff, because then you can just bring anybody back. So you always know it doesn't really matter anything that's happening in any of these movies. But I love that you brought in that Death of a Prince storyline in here as a puzzle piece, because I certainly wouldn't have known about that since I never really, read the comics or anything like that. But one thing though about kind of the messiness, I guess, of this movie and of, where the Black Manta character goes, for a while after the first Aquaman, inexplicably made $1 billion, it was announced that they were doing an Aquaman 2 and they were doing a spinoff called The Trench that was supposed to focus specifically on Black Manta and be more of like a horror spinoff. And I have to imagine part of the reason this movie is so messy is they used bits and pieces of both scripts and just kind of threw them together. And that's, I mean, all this stuff with Black Manta going underground, or not underground, but like deep underwater and finding this other city and there's ghosts and, all this stuff like that has to be from The Trench, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other problem too with all these movies nowadays is they make these huge announcements at like 20 different projects and they just throw them all up against the wall, seeing which one is going to stick. And it's kind of like, okay, that's cool if you want to do that to kind of whet fans' excitement. But I think fans now at this point, we're on to the fact that, okay, of all those projects, we'll be lucky if maybe 2 happen.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So, but yeah, that was just my huge frustration, man, is it was like, you're not even going to kill off the Tamura Morrison character. They're going to toy with our emotions. And we're going to think, oh, wow, like, okay, Arthur Curry, he has it bad now for Black Manta because not only did he torch his house and steal his kid, but he also left his dad to die. But then they're going to pull out this last minute, space MacGuffin where we see Tamura Morrison wearing this Atlantean, health device. And then at the end of the movie, spoiler, at the end of the movie, he's okay. Nicole Kidman is okay. The baby is fine. Amber Heard is fine. And it's like, man, they don't want to do anything with providing any kind of threat to these particular films at all. I mean, if you look at the Creed movies, okay, Rocky IV had zero problem killing off Apollo Creed, and all of the movies have have been echoing upon that. You don't see them bringing back the Creed character. Now, granted, those are steeped in a little bit more realism. I understand, but you know what I mean. But having those Fast and the Furious having those movies brought back characters that were killed, and having those movies suddenly made villains good guys all of a sudden. I mean, it's like, what are they doing?
Yep. No, well, and we brought up Fast and the Furious on the first Aquaman, but that applies here as well. It applies to every superhero movie. I mean, the Fast and Furious movies are basically superhero movies. And so, yeah, they just bring everybody back. There's no stakes. Like, it's what will look cool in the moment, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with King Kong and the Skull Island. We have like a little fetch quest-esque situation here where Aquaman and Orm have to go to this island, this like volcano island, and everything there is big. All of the bugs are big. There's a dead rat that the bugs are eating that's really big. Giant butterflies, giant this, giant that. Totally, a Skull Island kind of thing. A fun sequence, although incredibly rushed through. Like the whole thing, they're in and out of this entire island in maybe like 10 minutes of the entire 2-hour movie. I thought of the pitch meetings, how are they going to get out of this one? Super easy, barely an inconvenience. But it was fun while it was going on, and like a clear inspiration from the whole Skull Island thing. And it made for some, they probably spent a few bucks on those effects because the bugs were good and creepy looking, I think.
Well, that's a good segue for my next puzzle piece, because I thought it was very interesting that for the sequel, they decided to make it a buddy movie. Okay.
Yes.
Especially, okay, it's kind of a bold move too, especially to make it a buddy movie with the villain in the last movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, and again, going back to what I said about the lack of stakes, it's kind of like, okay, well, suddenly in this new movie, you're going to have him teaming up with the big bad guy in the last movie. Well, suddenly that makes the last movie seem almost useless in some in some kind of ways, when suddenly the hero is teaming up with the with who was ostensibly the villain in the last movie. And it's clear what they're doing here. Okay, that kind of leads me to my puzzle piece. Is it just kind of reminded me of, it's going with a buddy cop dynamic like what we saw in 48 Hours. Okay, or pretty much any of those buddy movies. What's really interesting, though, again, a different, an interesting creative choice, I guess you can say, is if you look at all of those buddy movies, whether it's 48 Hours, whether it's Midnight Run, you name it, but you always have the straight-laced guy, and then you always kind of have the wacky sidekick. Okay.
Yes.
And I mean, with Midnight Run, you had the wacky sidekick was Charles Grodin, but he was also the criminal. And then with 48 Hours, the wacky sidekick was Eddie Murphy, who again is also a criminal. And that's basically what they're doing here, is they're teaming up with the criminal or the villain. They're having Aquaman team up with the villain from the last movie. Only it kind of flips it a bit to where Orm, okay, that's the Patrick Wilson character, he's the straight-laced one, and Aquaman is so much more goofy in this movie than he was in the last movie. And so it's like, wow, our main character, okay, in this team up is going to be the goofy one. And I don't want to go as far as saying that he was inept, but it seemed like he was cracking so many more jokes, and I didn't think a lot of them really landed like they did in the first one. And I don't know, that's basically what the whole team up dynamic reminded me of here.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I thought the same thing, that it's so interesting that they made the main character the goofy one. Like he's like kind of the comic sidekick, and it's a really, I mean, James Wan is a really interesting filmmaker. I mean, I love *Malignant*. I'm still wearing my *Malignant* shirt actually, but I love James Wan, and he has so much fun with these like genre tropes and stuff like that, and just really kind of trying to mess with them. And I think that's such a knowing thing. Like, I think that he really wanted to do that with the relationship between these two guys. And I think that's great. It's one of my favorite things about the movie. So I'm sure some people saw that and were like, that's stupid. How can you make your main character goofy? But like, I thought that was a really good thing about this, and one of my favorite parts of it. I will go with an obvious one I'll throw in here, and that is the Pirates of the Caribbean series. I would especially go with the last one, Dead Men Tell No Tales, where at that point, it's throw as much CGI at the screen as you possibly can. There's just so much stuff happening in every single sequence. And I think that one involved going under the sea with ghosts and, like a hidden king and all this kind of stuff too, and mind control. And I think a lot of those same kind of themes were being explored there. I know most people did not like that one, but I thought Javier Bardem was fun in it. And it's, these two series, they kind of go hand in hand with everything going on the water and all the like ghost pirates and shit like that.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a point of contrition here. I'll just admit, I have not seen any of those pirate movies. How many have they made now? Is it 4 or 5? Is it 5
I think
now?
that was the 5th one, I want to say, but who could keep track, honestly?
Yeah, well, again, you want to talk about market saturation, but yeah, I have only seen the up to the 3rd one, and to be honest, I don't remember anything about those movies.
Yeah,
So-
the first one really holds up. I just watched it like a couple years ago. It is really fun, but yeah, the sequels, no one needs to rewatch those.
Well, you mentioned something really interesting real quick, if I may. I mean, this isn't one of my puzzle pieces, one of my notes, but I mean, you mentioned James Wan, and I completely agree with you. I think James Wan is a fantastic director. And you watch this film and you can see that he's really been hampered by studio notes from Warner Brothers. Okay,
Yeah.
because, and again, I'm not saying if you go with that Death of a Prince storyline, okay, that this film is kind of cribbing from. Obviously, I realize that this is not going to go super dark, okay? But if you look at the DC cinematic universe, okay, when they did that first, when they did that Man of Steel movie and that Batman versus Superman movie, I know that those movies get a ton of criticism and heat from fans. But if you look at them, I mean, there's no denying, David, and I think you'd agree with this, those films all look and feel different than the average superhero movie because they're a little bit dark. You know what I mean? They're a little bit dark. And if you look at James Wan, I mean, he did a movie that's really become forgotten that I think is fantastic called Death Sentence. Did you ever see Death Sentence?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Kevin Bacon? Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, that movie is awesome. So, I mean, this is a director who, I mean, he can go dark a little bit. And so, and again, it's a tricky thing, okay? Obviously, you take a property like Aquaman, I'm not expecting them to, kill a child and go, super duper dark, but he could have done something that was not hampered by the restrictions set forth by Warner Brothers and DC, and which kind of leads to the next puzzle piece that I had, my last one actually. But it's very clear that there were companies bigger than James Wan that were whispering in his ear, telling him, "You need to do this. You need to hit this beat." You know what I mean? And so it doesn't feel as much like a James Wan movie. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But I mean that's a good segue, because I mean that leads me to my last puzzle piece, which is 19. Oh, I'm trying to do the math on this one real quick. Yeah, 1997's Batman and Robin. I'm sure you're familiar with this one. You've seen it,
Of course. Yeah.
and the only reason I bring that up is because Joel Schumacher went on record for that one, apologizing for that one. But if you look at that movie, the characters in that particular film, they suddenly switch costumes in the final act, and they're suddenly driving these vehicles in the final act that really, in the grand scheme of things, don't make a heck of a lot of sense. And Joel Schumacher went on record, the reason for this is because Warner Brothers was pressuring him, and they were saying, we need to sell toys. Okay, we need to sell toys, and so you need to include this costume here at this part in the movie, because we have the toy line is going to be coming out. We're going to be doing that. And I mean, you see that again, going along with what I said with James Wan, having pressure from the studio. You look at that, and why does Jason Momoa put on a new costume in the second act of the movie when it really doesn't make any sense? Okay, I remember one of the, when this film was in production, they released the photo of Jason Momoa in that sleek black bodysuit, saying this was his new costume. Okay, and in the context of the movie, it's to provide him camouflage or whatever when he's going in and trying to break Patrick Wilson out of the prison that he was in. But that the only reason that was included was so that they could sell a a new toy for Aquaman.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And it doesn't, in the end, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It's not needed. You know what I mean?
Absolutely not needed. But they got to sell those toys. I think it's funny that when the first Aquaman came out, I'm pretty sure Batman and Robin was brought up as a puzzle piece for the reason of like the goofier side of what superhero movies can be, like the just real, just out there silly Saturday morning cartoons, like all that kind of stuff. And now, all these years later, we're bringing up Batman and Robin for the studio intervention and like, the real cynical, like, the studio's giving you a leash, but not too long of a leash, because when it comes all down to it, like it's still the business, and they've got to sell their toys.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really interesting that, for, like the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, obviously they were like, yeah, we'll keep our hands off this, Christopher Nolan. You know what you're doing, and we'll leave you be. Okay. But for these ones, they have their fingers in the pot on this one so much that where, like I said, it doesn't feel as much like a James Wan movie. He feels so much more like a Gun for Hire in this one than even he was for the first one to an extent.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'll do one more piece. I got a couple other things, but I think the one that I want to use though will be the Green Knight. David Lowery's The Green Knight, which back when that came out in 2021, I talked about how much it felt like a more beautiful cinematic version of what a video game movie is. And I feel like it's certain aspects of Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom are reaching for that, pulled back by certain things that we've been talking about here, but certainly using the video game trajectory of a story. You got to go talk to the king, you got to find the guy who knows where the secret sword is and the secret this and that, and like, where are we going to find the villain? Oh, he's up at the volcano level, like, we got to get into there, and like it's all of that kind of video game style storytelling, fetch quests, the whole thing, but put into a big giant adventure movie. And I think the Green Knight did it like really well. I think this movie does it to its own kind of restricted universe studio hampered degree, and they can't really do everything that they wanted to do, and maybe there's bits and pieces of different scripts happening, but it's, I think, going for that kind of thing. It's very much a video game movie without it being based on a video game.
Well, I mean, that's David. It's interesting how our notes are paralleling and lining one another, but that leads me to one of my other pieces is the fact. I mean, this kind of reminded me to an extent of, the film has become so dated nowadays, but they did that Final Fantasy Spirits Within movie that came out about 20 some odd years ago or whatever. I mean, and that was one of the first real, what was it called? Photorealistic movies. Okay.
Like the CG animation.
Yeah, yeah. And it does get to a certain point. I mean, look, they are doing things with CGI nowadays that we couldn't even really dream of, 20 years ago. I mean, but it's interesting with this film. Like I said earlier, it's very clear. I don't think they really had to build a single set for this movie. About 85 to 90% of it is all filmed in front of a green screen. And so it does beg the question at a certain point, like, why do we even have actors at a certain point? I mean, they could have, I hate to say it, but they could have made this movie 100% CGI animated, and I think it probably still would have played just fine. You know what I mean? But you get to a certain point where, like, when you see Aquaman flipping and swimming around and everything like that, or when he's on the seahorse and everything, it looks really cool, but that's also not Jason Momoa. You know what I mean? And so it's like at a certain point, like, why don't we just make this a full-on CGI animated movie at this point? And I almost kind of wonder if that's the point that we're going to be getting to. I mean, Robert Zemeckis has made those CGI animated movies. He did A Christmas Carol. He did Polar Express. I think he did the Beowulf one. You know what I mean? And so, and when those came out, they looked a little odd, but things have gotten better since then. I do wonder at a certain point if we may see more things more along that nature than then I mean, why even need actors at a certain point?
Yeah. Well, I mean, also we could throw Avatar in the list too. I mean, it was a puzzle piece when we did the first Aquaman. But speaking of making things photorealistic with computer generated imagery, and it definitely fits here as well. Also, something that we haven't mentioned, orichalcum, which is essentially unobtainium. So,
Oh yes,
you can definitely include Avatar on the list there.
yeah. I do have to bring it back slightly, though. I mean, I'd like to ask you real quick. What did you think of Dolph Lundgren's inclusion in this film? I personally I loved him in the first one, but when I heard that they were going to be minimizing Amber Heard's role in this film, it kind of made me wonder, like, oh man, because if there's not Amber Heard, he plays her father. Like, does that mean less scenes of him? But I was actually pleasantly surprised he was in this film more than I thought he would, even though most of his scenes are him standing there at council tables pretty much saying, well, Aquaman, if you do this, this may happen. I advise against that. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Well, I think he made the most of his time in this, and also, like I said, I do think Patrick Wilson is the star of this movie. He's so great, and him and Dolph Lundgren have a rapport in this, where he doesn't trust him and everything, and so that makes for a couple of good joke moments. There's the moment where Dolph Lundgren doesn't want to give him a weapon, stuff like that, and so he definitely gets a few moments. But as we've kind of talked about, as much as we did like this movie, the script is kind of just patchwork. And so I think a lot of what he might have done in a better version of the movie is kind of on the cutting room floor.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Well, anyway, thanks for indulging me and talking about it. Yeah, but I mean, I thought, like I said, you said it perfectly. I think he does the best with what he's been given. I can only imagine. I mean, you can tell Dolph looks very uncomfortable in that giant suit that he's wearing. Okay, especially in that scene where they're on land, because when he's underwater, you see it, and I'm thinking like, okay, maybe they might have CGI'd a lot of that suit on him, but then there's the scene where they're on land. I mean, and that suit looks like it has to weigh like 50 pounds or something. Like, I can only imagine how uncomfortable all of them are in these these massive gladiator outfits that they're wearing.
Yeah, it can't be fun filming this stuff, but
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like Jason Momoa is having fun, but everybody else can't be that fun. But I'll run down the list of puzzle pieces here, and then we'll get into some closing thoughts. We of course talked about all superhero movies with a glowy thing to collect, as well as Loki, James Gunn's whole announcement of the DC EU, Black Panther and Iron Man, Geostorm. You brought up Aquaman, Death of a Prince, which was really interesting to hear about. Then we also got some Fast and Furious in there, Skull Island and King Kong, 48 Hours, Midnight Run, various other buddy comedies, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man Tell No Tales, Batman and Robin, The Green Knight, Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within, and Avatar. I think there's a lot of overlap with the first movie here as far as puzzle pieces are concerned, but it's kind of more of the same. And that's what I wanted out of this movie, because I didn't want them to go more serious because it's the end of the DCEU. I also didn't want it to get too stupid, you know what I mean? Because it is a very ridiculous series, these two Aquaman movies. But I think the fact that we got more of the same is a good thing, and honestly, exactly what I was hoping for.
Well stated. Well stated. I mean, yeah, I know earlier I said, like, and again, I want to stress, it's not like I wanted them to take this a little bit too dark. You know what I mean? But at the same hand, on the same side, it did get a little too silly. And again, I mean, if you're gonna make the main hero more of a joke, then I don't know, that's kind of a difficult mountain to climb, I think, especially for an audience. You know what I mean? Like, why would we want to follow this character if he is so silly and buffoonish? But I think Jason Momoa was fantastic in the role as much. And again, I mean, I will say it. The first Aquaman did so much for the DCEU. It's really kind of interesting that the character who was always a bit of a joke in the lineup of Justice League characters was the character that became the the triumph for that entire for that entire universe. Unfortunately, again, this film was really hampered.
A very strange place to leave this universe, but hey, it's what happened. That's all there is to it. But yeah, I think that does it for Aquaman and the Lost City. Sean, is there another movie you watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
This is going to sound really cheesy, but I did give a rewatch a couple nights ago to Double Team, the classic film with Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dennis Rodman. Interestingly, in the final act of Double Team, the big bad guy, who's played by Mickey Rourke, kidnaps Van Damme's baby, forcing Van Damme to team up with Dennis Rodman to go and get him, similar to this particular film. So maybe we could say,
hey, that sounds like a puzzle piece.
Yeah, maybe we could do that as well. But I will say about Double Team, as stupid as it is, kind of like this movie, every time I watch it, I have a ton of fun with it because it is just so colorful and goofy, and I can't help but smile every time I watch that ridiculous movie. So
amazing. Yeah, I might have to revisit that. I haven't seen it since it came out. But tell people where they can find you and your podcast.
Yeah, thanks again, man. This was a lot of fun. So my name is Sean. Obviously, the podcast is I Must Break This Podcast, which takes a look at the extensive filmography of Mr. Dolph Lundgren. We are currently caught up with all of his cinematic efforts. He does have one that is awaiting release that comes out next month called Wanted Man, which he also wrote and directed. So getting very, very excited for that one. So stay tuned.
Yeah, that's very exciting. That's really cool. But yeah, thank you again so much for joining me on the show, and I look forward to getting you back again sometime.
All right, take care, man. All right, so major thanks to David Rosen for his time and once again letting me guest on his show. You can see Aquaman, which is most likely maybe still in theaters, but will also most likely be on HBO Max here soon as of this recording. You can also find that conversation as well as all of his many film conversations on his respective podcast, Piecing It Together. So please be sure to check that out. Next up is our coverage of Showdown at the Grand, which was released back in November of last year by Shout Studios. In this mix of action, comedy, and parody, Terrence Howard plays George Fuller, the proprietor of the Warner Grand, a movie theater that's still steeped in the traditions of the bygone era. Yet when some greedy land developers won't take no for an answer and begin using violent tactics to secure the rights to his livelihood, Fuller enlists the help of aging action star Claude Luke Halliday to ensure that the Warner Grand sticks around for at least one more showing.
Here at the Warner Grand, we operate 365 days a year. We got a little something for everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the man who saved the world thrice, killed Dracula twice, only got his heart broke one time. Claude Luke Halliday.
Bon voyage.
Our company would like to offer you a very generous amount for this place.
Some folks, they'll rob you with a 6-shooter, and others with a fountain pen.
It's time you either play ball or stay out of my way.
They said they were coming back for Mr. Hollywood.
You got real combat training, right? You'll be fine. Stay away from my friends, my theater, and my neighborhood.
I hate blood.
Ride the rainbow, you son of a... Terminate with extreme prejudice. Want the water, Grant? Come and get it. Wait, I'm not ready.
Returning to the show to help me chat this one is my good buddy Chris Prentice. Chris and I go way back, and he's been regularly guesting on the show since its inception almost 7 years ago. It's always great to have Chris on. He's always willing to discuss many of these films, especially the ones that maybe are not so great, but that doesn't stop us from having fun conversations. So, with that out of the way, here is our discussion on Showdown at the Grand. All right, so we're here to discuss one of Dolph's more recent efforts, the tribute to Grindhouse cinema, Showdown at the Grand. Joining me to discuss this one today is my good buddy, Chris Prentice. Chris, thanks for coming back, man.
Hey, Sean, how you doing? I'm glad to be here. It's a pleasure to be back on your show.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, shoot. I mean, I should probably let the listeners know. I mean, you and I, we've been pretty tight. We've been pretty close for over 20 years now. I want to say, something like that.
Has been a very, very long time, and a treasure 20 years, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, and you've been with me since the show's inception, I guess, since the very first episode, and here we are, kind of winding to, I don't want to say an end, but we're getting caught up with all of Mr. Lundgren's efforts, and this particular film. I mean, this is an interesting one. Okay, so we can just say this was released back in November of this past year, courtesy of Shout Studios. I remember when it was in production, I'm sure you remember too, they released that photo of Dolph, and he was wearing that bizarre wig and those sunglasses, and you're kind of thinking, what in the hell is this project? Like, what is this? And then when they announced that he was going to be in a supporting role and Terrence Howard was going to be the lead, it was, I don't want to say that I got excited, but it was interesting. I mean, Terrence Howard's, he's a fine actor, I will say. And so knowing that he was kind of going to be in the lead of this kind of bizarre Quentin Tarantino inspired Grindhouse type film was, I guess, a little promising, right?
Yeah, I do remember seeing that first photo of Lundgren and how he looked in this movie, and it was not a good first impression. It was kind of like, oh God, what is he doing now? I mean, this don't look too good. But yeah, I think hearing that Terrence Howard was going to be the star, and that it wasn't just something being thrown together by hack producers and a hack director, that it seemed to be like an independent film in more of the traditional spirit of independent film, and not an independent film in the tradition of the kind of stuff that Bruce Willis used to make. So as learning a little more about it, it sounded like it had at least a little more potential to not just be garbage.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, we can just say right now, this film was written and directed by a gentleman by the name of Michael Oblowitz. And I mean, it's very clear. We can just say right now, it's very clear that this dude is a huge fan of Quentin Tarantino. He was clearly inspired by the style of Quentin Tarantino. I mean, everything about this film, it might as well be a Quentin Tarantino a movie. It's funny. You and I kind of kicked around for years doing a podcast called The Tarantino Effect that looked at all of the films that were directly inspired by the Quentin Tarantino style, or better yet, by the style of Pulp Fiction. And I mean, this film would certainly fall within that wheelhouse tenfold.
Yeah, definitely. It borrows a bit from Tarantino. What's actually kind of funny is in the credits for this movie, there's like a little section where the filmmaker, the director, kind of lists his influences. He just it's just a section where he lists a bunch of directors that I guess that he likes and who influenced this movie. And he mentions Tarantino, he mentions Michael Mann, but one thing that's odd is that he also lists the name Pune, which I assume to mean Albert Pune, but it's misspelled. It's spelled in the credits Puyn instead of Pyun. But yeah, I mean, you can definitely see that this guy has been influenced by some of these sort of low budget directors that kind of made their names in the 80s and 90s, and I think that's to this movie's credit for sure.
Yeah, most definitely. And I mean, and the other thing I will say about this film that's really kind of cool is that at this point in Mr. Lundgren's career, I mean, Van Damme, his competitor, we can say, has been doing this for years, where Van Damme was taking on roles that were kind of playing upon his image, right? Or taking on roles that were poking fun at the type of characters he's played before. And so it only makes sense that Dolph, for this particular film, take on a similar role. I mean, we can just say right now, Dolph plays the character Claude Luke Halliday, who is an aging action star whose best days are behind him, and so we get plenty of scenes that kind of show his B movies from the past, I guess we can say. And so I will say, I mean, there's some things about this film that I liked, some other things maybe that I didn't like so much. But what I did appreciate was that, yeah, we have Dolph, who is now at this stage taking on a role where he's poking fun at his image, he's playing with his image, doing exactly what Van Damme has been doing. And I think it works on that level.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. It's, Dolph has done a little bit of this kind of, sending up his image. He did that episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Right.
He's done his fair share of commercials where he's kind of spoofing himself. But I think what I liked about him in this movie is that, yeah, it is kind of, poking fun at action stars and kind of, what they might be in reality, but it's not really the obvious jokes. It's like his character is a little bit off, but it's not like he's this guy who's desperate really to become a star again, or that he's doing whatever he can to track down another film role. He's a little bit off. But it's like in kind of a slightly different way. It's so I appreciated that it's not the obvious joke when it comes to his character in this movie.
And I think that's where you and I may slightly differ a bit, and that's totally cool. I mean, but that was my big issue with this film. I'll just say it right now. Actually, is that this film, it really doesn't know what it wants to be. Okay, it doesn't know. I mean, there's a little bit of comedy in there. There's a little bit of action in there. There's a little bit of, like I said, that kind of that grindhouse cinema, feel and everything. But it doesn't fully lean into one particular genre or one particular side. So in the end, what we're watching is a film that kind of, it doesn't know what it really wants to be. And that was my big complaint with Lundgren's character, with Lundgren's role, is I feel like he would have. I wish he would have gone just a little bit bigger with this character. I mean, he's a guy. He's proven that he can do comedy. He's proven that he can do action. He's proven that he can do drama. And this character that he's playing is a little bit of all three, but he never really commits to one particular area. So his character that you're watching in the end, you really don't know what's up with him.
You see, I actually think that's a positive.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I kind of liked that. I kind of liked that it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. And it wasn't just kind of the easy joke about the aging action star who's just past his glory days trying to I mean, it sort of goes there towards the end of the movie, but not fully. So I don't know, the fact that he's kind of awkward in this movie, and that he's like that, the scene where he's, first introduced by Terrence Howard and to the crowd, and he just doesn't really know what he's supposed to be doing. Like, I liked that. I just thought that was just kind of different, and it wasn't what I was expecting. So I don't know. I liked him here. and it's to his credit, and I think to the filmmaker's credit, that it's not the obvious jokes. It's not, okay, yeah, he's speaking with a Russian accent, and he's doing a variation on "I must break you" and blah blah blah. It's kind of the stuff that we would expect. So when look, these past few years, we've seen Dolph in a lot of movies that aren't so great. And so the fact that he kind of is in this one where, yeah, the movie doesn't 100% nail what it's trying to do, but you can tell when you're watching it that it is being made by people who really want to make movies. And sometimes I don't get that sense in the movies that he does. Like, I don't know what the people who are actually making the movies seem to want or what they're really into. But here I can at least tell that, yes, these are filmmakers who really, really love movies. They're trying to do a nice kind of love letter, not just to movies, but to kind of the old time classic movie theater. And that does come through in this film.
Well, that's an excellent segue, because that was going to be one of my biggest compliments about the film, actually, is that everybody in this particular film comes to play. I mean, and that's very, very clear. Everybody here is acting their ass off and really, really trying. I mean, the production values for this film, I don't know what the actual final budget was for this particular film or how many shooting days it has. But I mean, you and I have been saying this for years, though, man. I mean, this film looks like a real movie. For a change. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of sad that we're living in an era where that is a compliment, but it is. I mean, how often do we watch a movie on Netflix, or do we watch something on Prime, and it doesn't feel like you're watching a movie. You just kind of feel like you're watching a TV show that's a little bit longer than a regular TV show. And this movie, for all of its faults, it's a legitimate movie. I sat down to watch it, and I felt like I saw a complete story from start to finish, and that was my relationship with it, and that's just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Of course, it's not going to be something that maybe I cite years from now as one of my favorites from 2023. But if someone were to ask me and say, "Hey, did you ever see this Showdown at the Grand?" and I'd say, "Yeah, you know what? That's pretty good. It's got a lot of heart," and I appreciate that with watching so many movies where I feel like nobody cares, from the actors, the directors, the writers, the producers. In this movie, everyone seems to be trying their best, and so I'm going to give it credit for that.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I mean, we can probably just say, I mean, we probably should kind of get it out of the way, but I mean, the basic conceit of this film is Terrence Howard plays the character George Fuller. Okay, he's the proprietor of the Warner Grand, and this is a movie theater that's really steeped in the traditions of this kind of bygone era of movie theater going, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And basically, okay, I mean, if we really break it down, the conflict, if you will, is some greedy land developers are coming in. They want to buy the Warner Grand and demolish it and secure that land. George Fuller doesn't want to, so of course these land developers are resorting to dirty tactics to finally acquire it. And if we get to the big high concept gimmick of the film, it's that Terrence Howard, so this is the George Fuller character, he ends up teaming up with the action star that he idolizes to take on to take on these villains. I will say, I love that concept. I think it's a really, really fun concept. That's, I guess, one of my minor quibbles with this film is it happens a little bit. I don't know if you felt this way or not, but the whole team up aspect really doesn't happen until way too late into the film. And then once they do team up, spoiler, but Lundgren's Halliday character, he gets killed a little bit too soon. So that team up element really doesn't really doesn't run its course like I hoped it would have. When I first heard the idea for this film, it doesn't really lean into that as much as I thought it would either.
Right. I mean that aspect of the movie is really just the third act.
Yeah.
For the first two acts of the film, it's really just about George and his struggles, trying to keep this theater going, getting pressure from the evil corporate lady who's trying to buy him out. So it's really just kind of a character study for the most part, and we only really see Lundgren, at least in the first 2/3 of the movie, in the clips from the various movies that his character has appeared in. That's actually maybe my biggest gripe with the movie, is that I kind of wish that the different clips for the movies were a little closer to the kind of movies that Dolph actually had made. But it's all those clips, they seem, for the most part, they seem more like movies from the 70s, not really movies from the 90s. You get Moses versus the Nazis. That was one of them. Necropolis. Most of the clips, they seem to be movies that would have been done in the 70s. I think the one exception is that there was one movie called Cyber Cartel, where they have a clip from, and that seemed like maybe something that would have been in the 90s. But so that's kind of my one gripe, is at least in terms of those clips of Lundgren's character. But yeah, I see what you're saying, that maybe it could have benefited from having the team up part of the movie be a little bit bigger than it actually is. But I just see it as, really, this movie is kind of a character piece about Terrence Howard's theater owner, and so really the point of the movie is less about the team up and more just about his struggles, his life, and how he's trying to keep his theater afloat.
I mean, well, there's an awesome segue there, Chris, because this film is a character study, and you really wouldn't expect a character study from this type of film in this day and age, I would think. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But I mean, that we can just say right now, I think Terrence Howard, I mean, let's just say it. I think he's easily the best thing about this movie. I mean, man, when I said earlier that everybody came to play, I mean, Terrence Howard in this particular film, you can tell how invested he is, not just in this movie, but with this particular character. I almost kind of wonder if he's pulling from a personal place in portraying this particular character. I mean, but let's just break it down real quick. I mean, I don't know if I'm sure you noticed this, but he's profusely sweating in many of his scenes. I mean, you can just see the sweat that is coming off him, and you really do. I mean, when I first heard that Dolph was going to be co-starring in this film with Terrence Howard, I'm thinking, well, I mean, say what you will about Terrence Howard. I know he kind of got the shaft from Marvel, but I mean, I think he's a fine actor. I mean, and you buy him. That's the great thing about this film, is that you buy him as this theater owner who's desperately trying to preserve the glory days of cinema.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, obviously the reason that we're talking right now is we're both, big Dolph fans, but yeah, Terrence Howard is really the biggest asset for this movie.
He's the real deal.
Oh, for sure. I think he's a good actor. He's been a good actor for a very long time. I think he's kind of been around since like the early 90s. I think the first thing I remember seeing him in was he had a really good scene in Dead Presidents, where he kind of gets into it with Lorenz Tate in that movie in a pool hall, and that's kind of the first movie I can remember seeing him in. And I mean, yeah, he's a really good actor. I know he was a producer on this movie, so I think he had a little more at stake than if he was just an actor on it. He did a song for the film's credits. I mean, he's very believable. I mean, it's like I've never met anyone who owns a small movie theater, but in watching this movie, I can kind of watch it and say, yeah, I guess that's probably about what they would be if there was a guy who was owning this kind of a theater. But yeah, I think Howard does a really good job. I mean, the guy's he's a quality actor. He's kind of from what I've read, he's a bit of a aloof and kind of out there in some aspects of life, but in terms of just a presence on screen, he's really good.
Well, and can I say something real quick that is probably going to piss off many, and I think this is blasphemy to say, but I think he was a better roadie than Don Cheadle in the Iron Man movie. I'm just gonna say it.
I don't think that's blasphemy. I mean, like, well, so this might be blasphemy, but like, okay, yeah, Don Cheadle, he was great back in the day in Devil in a Blue Dress. He was great in Boogie Nights, but we're talking about a very, 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 very long time ago with some of those roles. He's just kind of like a guy now. He's just a guy who is in movies, and it's like I can't really. I mean, I'm probably the wrong guy to ask because I'm just not as into these Marvel movies as a lot of people. But when I think about him in these movies, there isn't really like, oh, that's the defining moment for Rhodes that Don Cheadle captured. And, I mean, a little bit of that is because there's just so many characters in these movies that, people are going to get kind of lost. But I don't know. I think Terrence Howard is just a much better performer overall than Cheadle.
Well, here's I mean, I'll just say it. Okay. Here is, in my opinion, one of the true call signs of why I think Terrence Howard was so much better in that role. Because if you remember in that 2008, the original movie, now granted, I mean, and don't worry, I don't plan on talking Marvel and all that stuff for very long, but I mean, if you can go back that far, now granted, the first Iron Man movie, that was the film that kicked it, that started the entire thing, that pretty much, how do I want to say this? That was the film that pretty much started what we have today in terms of cinema. But sure. There was that scene near the end, okay, of the first Iron Man movie where, and I'm sure you know the moment, but where Terrence Howard looks at the prototype suit, okay, as Tony Stark, as the Robert Downey Jr. is going into battle, he looks at that suit and he says, "Next time, baby." Okay. Yeah. And I remember seeing that in the theater. Okay. And even when I've seen it in subsequent viewings, that is a line, that is a scene that people still remember. Can you really remember anything that Don Cheadle has done in the 5 or 6 movies that he's been in these movies?
Like I said, it's like Don Cheadle is in no way a bad actor, but he's just a guy. He's a guy who is in movies. That's who he is.
Yeah.
He doesn't get the needle moving. And whereas I think Terrence Howard, he's got kind of that just a little bit of a spark to him and a little bit of an edge that I appreciate. And, I mean, he's one of the few actors that I can think of that has, dared to cross Marvel. And, it might have hurt him a little bit at a time, but I think he did eventually get that show Empire. That was a big hit. And so, he's at least still around. It's there aren't many of these guys that have really taken Marvel to task and kind of at least as publicly as Terrence Howard did. I guess there's Ed Norton. He's another one, and we really don't hear a whole heck of a lot from Ed Norton that much anymore these days. But it's I really think that he added a lot to that Rhodes character that. Once it went to Don Cheadle, it was kind of a lost cause. And I don't think anybody really has like, oh, this is my favorite, War Machine moment from these movies. Cause it's just, he was an afterthought at that point.
Well, and let's be honest. Okay. I mean, we're starting to see it now as of this recording, but, the bubble of the superhero movies is finally starting to burst. The bottom is slowly starting to kind of drop out, and so I think a lot of the companies that are in charge of things are kind of doing some retconning and looking at where things have gone wrong. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more think pieces and we hear some actors coming out and kind of talking about the monster that that Disney and Marvel have been.
Yeah, it's definitely with what we saw from the Marvels, that had to have been a wake up call for
Yeah.
for Disney and for Marvel, because the time where they could just kind of throw anything out there, and say, hey, Marvel presents whatever. It's like even the Eternals didn't do so well, but it did not flop as bad as the Marvels. And so I think there is definitely going to be changes in the movies that are coming up. I mean, I think the next one that Marvel has is Deadpool 3. They're going to have Hugh Jackman back as Wolverine. I think that's something that's at least going to get people excited when that's ready to come out. Whether it's a good movie, who knows? But at least that's kind of a hook that can kind of get people excited to say, oh yeah, remember Hugh Jackman, he was Wolverine. Oh, let's go see him in the X-Force outfit. That'll be something. But yeah, it has been a real steep decline in recent years, and not just for Marvel, but for DC. And as we know now, Dolph is kind of part of history, as he is in kind of the last of the Snyder. I guess I don't even want to use the term Snyderverse, but he's at least a part of the last Snyderverse DC movie, and I don't think we're going to see Dolph in any future DC films going forward.
Yeah. Well, going back to Terrence Howard real quick, I mean,
yep.
Let's just say, I mean, I don't know where you felt. I mean, actually, I imagine you probably have some things to say about this. But his wardrobe in this film, okay,
yeah.
So this is one of those things where you have to wonder, okay, was this Terrence Howard's doing, or was it the production? I mean, but his character, his Fuller character, has a wild wardrobe in this film. He wears cowboy hats and leather dusters. I mean,
yeah.
Again, it's clear Terrence Howard, he clearly knows the type of film that he's in, and he's really relishing it, but he's playing it so serious, which is one of the positives to the film. Considering how silly he looks.
Oh, absolutely. And I think his look and his wardrobe, that's, again, when you're dealing with movies that are, made on a shoestring budget, like this one, you need to find ways to set your character apart. And an easy way to do that is with your costumes and with your wardrobe. And yeah, Howard, he definitely pulls that off here. Definitely a very distinctive look. And again, I think it's a good match for his character. And he's really the heart and soul of the movie. Like I said, I like what Dolph does in it. There's some decent laughs at what he's doing in his role, and he's perfectly fine in a supporting role here. But Terrence Howard is why this movie works for me. And like I said, it's a character piece, and he's just very believable. He's very believable, very charming, and his passion for this movie theater comes through 100%. And I think that's the key to making the movie work, because if you don't buy in his character, and if you're not rooting for him to save his theater, then there's really no point to even watch it. So the fact that he pulls that off so well, you have a decent movie.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if we look at the film, I mean, yeah, like we said, the high concept gimmick of the film is theater owner teams up with an action star to fend off these villains. We can just say that George Fuller, his character, is a huge fan of Dolph's Halliday character. The theater lobby in the film is a shrine, literally, to Halliday's films, including many props from all of these films. One of them is like this sword axe thing that you just, as soon as they show it, that Dolph's character is going to be picking it up and wrecking some havoc with it. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, that you and I may be slightly at opposite ends on, which is totally fine. I mean, but yeah, again, we get tons of these scenes of these false movies starring the Halliday character, clearly meant to be silly. They are lots of fun, though. I mean, me personally, I wished that, again, we got just a little bit more of Halliday's backstory, and there were so many questions that I was left wondering. Like, for example, okay, why is the Halliday character so depressed and burnt out, and why is he accepting this last minute Q&A gig at the Warner Grand? And the film Unfortunately, it just kind of leaves that open for you to kind of make assumptions with, but they never either they didn't answer it on purpose, or maybe so there were some things cut with this particular film, because that's the other thing too that I will say. I mean, this is a clean 90-minute film that doesn't overstay its welcome, which I will say is a perk, but also a bit of a detriment, because you can almost tell that Michael Oblowitz, he had a bigger vision with this film, but he wasn't able to flesh it out fully.
Yeah, that's probably true. I'm sure that may have happened, but man, talk about Marvel movies. If I can get movies that are just 90 minutes and they can tell a compelling enough story in that 90 minutes, that's a relief these days. So I'm not going to knock the movie for that. And yeah, it's true. There are some questions that you could have about Dolph's character, and okay, why is he so down in the dumps, and what is going on with him? But I feel like the fact that the movie doesn't 100% spell that out, it's not really a negative. It kind of, it's you're kind of open to your own interpretation as to what the hell happened to this guy from the time that he was a successful action movie star to now, where he can barely stay coherent in front of a crowd. So it's a question worth asking, but I don't think the movie necessarily had to fill us in on all that. I think we kind of get it that he's obviously not quite as stable a person as he might have been 30 years ago. He's kind of been invited for this one night of maybe reclaiming his glory and having a crowd laud him and show their appreciation, and he just doesn't really know how to handle that anymore. And that's just where he is in life, and how he got to that point in life we don't really know, and I don't really call that a negative.
Yeah, I mean, well, you said it earlier. I mean, when you and I were talking about this offline about a week or two ago. But what's so interesting is, and I wouldn't have picked this up if you hadn't mentioned it, but this film is basically Fright Night. Okay.
Yeah.
If you remember the film Fright Night, we have the main character who teams up with he teams up with a TV show host who fights vampires, right?
He was kind of like every city kind of had that sort of creature feature show back in like the 70s and 80s that would show, the late night horror movies. And so, yeah, that's who the protagonist, the guy from Herman's Head, was the protagonist. That's who he teams up with to kind of battle vampires. And the kind of the basic story of that is essentially the story here, only this one, Showdown at the Grand, has the whole movie theater aspect to it, and that's a big enough difference to where it does set it apart. But yeah, just kind of that basic story of taking somebody from a world of films and then having them try to do that in real life. There's a lot of similarities between this movie and Fright Night.
So I'm actually going to go one further and say that it actually reminded me of the Chuck Norris, Jonathan Brandis classic Sidekicks.
Boy. Well,
I mean,
yes. Yes. Well, look, any time that we can bring up the works of Joe Piscopo on a podcast is, I mean, how can we not talk about Sidekicks and I'll just go ahead and say it, the tragedy that struck Jonathan Brandis in later years. I don't know, how have we recovered as a people?
Well, I mean, and also we got to talk about the villains in this film. I mean, that's the other thing too about this film is I think the villains are okay. I mean, they're not spectacular. I mean, let's just say that they're not ones that you remember long after viewing, but they're okay. I mean, I guess the head villain is this character. She's played by Amanda Rigetti. Okay, yeah. She's the head of this development firm who are hassling George Fuller. I think she's actually quite good. Who are also pretty good are her disciples, played by John Sklarloff and Mike Ferguson. I mean, I think they add the appropriate amount of menace to the proceedings, and they work. I will say though, I mean, I had an idea right before we sat down to record, but I had an idea for where this film zigged when I feel like it should have zagged. I mean, and by that I mean, okay, these villains in this film, they are land developers, okay, who want the land. Sure. I get that, okay, but my problem with that is we've seen that before in a number of films, and I feel like if the Terrence Howard character is a how do I say this? If the Terrence Howard character is a vessel for director Michael Oblowitz's appreciation and passion for cinema, then don't you think it would have made sense and it would have been pretty cool if instead of being land developers, they were the proprietors of like a streaming service that is putting theaters out of business? If they had leaned into that, then man, talk about having a passion for cinema. That would have been, I think, much better. Yeah, I mean that's if we're talking about how to make it even more relevant to what's going on today, that would have been the way to go. And there could have been a whole angle of the streaming service wanting to take over the theater and just as a means to show their films and make them eligible for awards, because that's kind of the thing. Yeah, that's where we're heading. Let's be honest. That's where we're heading.
I mean, we're there to some degree already. But sure, I think that would have been a really good idea. Now that I think about it, that would have been a really good idea, actually. But I do, like you were mentioning, I do think the people that they got to play these bad guys do a good job. I thought Amanda Rigetti, I think the only other thing I'd ever seen her in was the last Friday the 13th. She was like the main girl in the 2009 Friday the 13th, and I thought she was good here. She's just kind of an icy person, and it's not really a role that has a whole lot of nuance to it, but I thought she did a perfectly fine job. And I think that actually would have been a good idea if they had been representing some sort of a streaming service, which is trying to basically zap all of society of their small beloved hometown movie theaters.
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's much more else we can really say about this particular film. I mean, because again, it's Dolph showing up in a bit supporting role, which I mean is at this point it's proven. I mean, look, and I've said this on the show numerous times, but whether or not, regardless if he's the main character or if he's a supporting character, I mean, he has that presence about him that when he is on screen, I mean, it's man. He delivers. He completely absorbs your attention and everything like that. But I mean, there's not much more to say about this particular film. I'll go to you real quick. Is there anything that you would like to say or add regarding Showdown at the Grand?
Well, I would just say, and look, you, because of this show, you watch all of Dolph's movies, so you see them all. I watch most. But there certainly are some, especially some recent ones, where I just kind of look at them like The Best Man. It's like I look at that and I just no, thank you. I just don't have any real reason to watch that. But this is one that I'm glad I watched. I'm glad that he did this. I think this is a nice little supporting role for him in kind of a small independent movie, and I have no problems with his work here. Like I said, the movie ain't perfect. It has its flaws, but for the most part, it does deliver what it sets out to do. And like we said earlier, it's mostly thanks to Terrence Howard. I think he is excellent. This might be the best work I've seen from him since he played the basketball coach in that one part of movie 43.
Oh yeah. I completely forgot about that one. I mean, I know it gets a lot of heat today, and people don't like really mentioning it. But say what you will about Crash and its maudlin politics and everything like that. But I think he's fantastic in the movie Crash as well. You know what I mean? As the TV, what is he? He's a TV producer and a writer who kind of who kind of trades words with Tony Danza.
Yeah,
of all
that's
people.
that's
But
really
he-
that's
yeah.
honestly all I kind of remember from Crash is Tony Danza. The rest of it's kind of left my head. But whenever anyone says about the movie Crash, I just think, oh yeah, that's the movie Tony Danza was in.
Yeah.
That's about all I remember. But yeah, it's like I'll give you another forgotten Terrence Howard movie. Do you remember the movie Pride?
Yes, about swimming. Yes, I remember actually Bill Burr's bit about that particular film where he was like, "Wow, this is the point where we've gotten to with sports movies where we're talking about a high school swim team." Okay.
Well, look, it's Terrence Howard and it's Bernie Mac. Bernie Mac is was kind of the curmudgeon janitor that ends up helping Terrence Howard to coach the swim team. But the film's secret weapon had to be Tom Arnold as the evil white man swim coach. I thought he was he was kind of the secret ingredient because he's a real, nobody really likes Tom Arnold, and he kind of plays to that to great effect in Pride. So a very derivative kind of school sports movie, but there aren't that many swimming movies around, so let's give it up for Pride a little bit. That was at least it tried to be a little bit different and not just be another football or basketball film.
But you know what? Terrence Howard was excellent in it. You know what I mean?
Always,
I mean, he was
he's good.
he delivers. So
yeah.
Yeah. Well, with regard to my recommend, I mean, you know what? I'm right there with you to an extent. I mean, look, call me surprised. I mean, I'll just completely put that on my sleeve. When I first heard about this film, when I first saw the first image of Dolph, I'm thinking, oh boy, like here's another easy paycheck. Okay, there we go.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I was very surprised. I mean, I will say for a film of this nature, it's really pretty cool to see the production values put to great use. Like I said earlier, I do wish that Dolph got a little bit bigger with his role. I wish that he really committed to one particular side, whether it be the drama, the action, or the comedy. But at the end of the day, I think what we have is a decently crafted movie. And as a debut film from Michael Oblowitz, I think it is a fantastic rookie showcase. I think we're going to be seeing more from this guy. I haven't heard of him. I didn't see, like he kind of came out of he was under my radar. Like I had no idea who this dude was, but man, as a rookie, kind of look at me type film, I think it does a wonderful job.
Oh, I would certainly watch another movie from him, and maybe he struck up a rapport with Dolph, and Dolph will be the lead in his next movie. So that's how it works with these kind of productions. You take a small part or a supporting role, and then the next movie that comes up, it could be a Dolph Lundgren vehicle, and it'll be one that we talk about for ages and ages. So I wish him good luck, and he did a very nice job here, as did Terrence Howard, as did Dolph Lundgren. I give credit to everybody. I even like the John Savage. He was in this as like the guy that owns the pawn shop, and he's an actor that's been around a long time, and I always like him. And small part here, but I like seeing John Savage. He's a good actor.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't really talked about him, but yeah, he shows up in this film. What's interesting is you could pretty much lift that character out of the film,
probably, and
the film is going to play just fine. But even he shows up and delivers. You know what I mean? So
yeah, like he's one of those actors that's been around a very, very long time. Probably The Deer Hunter might be kind of his biggest movie. If anybody's listening, they want to see a very good old John Savage movie, check out The Onion Field. That's a great movie that he did. Was a really good bad guy performance from James Woods. So that'll be my recommendation for this episode is The Onion Field.
Well, there you go. I was going to ask if you had anything to plug or anything to give a shout out to or anything to recommend, but there you go. Thank you.
I'm plugging The Onion Field. There you go. I hope maybe if we get a little bump to their streaming rental sales, that'll make this whole podcast appearance worth it.
Right on. Well, Chris, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you very, very much, and we'll talk soon. All right, man.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it, and glad you had me on for a good movie.
All right. So again, that was our coverage of Showdown at the Grand, which is available on video on demand providers. Major thanks to Chris Prentice for coming through once again and chatting about another under the radar Dolph Lundgren film. So that's it for today and this episode. Please feel free to rate and review the show on iTunes or wherever else you go to subscribe. We always appreciate the reviews. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next time on I Must Break This Podcast.